Welcome and thank you for joining me. I'm Pafoua Yang. On the podcast today, we're talking to an experienced business leader and former treasurer of the Republican Party of Minnesota. Mark Blaxill is running for Minnesota's 3rd Congressional District. Thank you for joining us, Mark.
Thank you for having me.
Mark, tell me, of course. Tell me a little bit more about yourself and your background.
Well, as you said, I've had a long business career. I spent 40 years in business, most of that in the consulting world. So I've advised businesses all over the world in a lot of different industries, mostly manufacturing. So I've worked in forest products and automotive industries and information technology. And so I've had a very strong grounding in policy questions, economic issues, innovation issues, written about it in many places. And along the way, I've also had an experience as a father. My youngest child was diagnosed with autism when she was 3, and so for 20 years, I've been advocating for her, advocating for families with autism, and trying to get the government to do the right thing in terms of acknowledging the sharp increases that we've had in the rates of autism in the last 30 years.
Can you go more into depth about that? What are you trying to get the government to do?
Well, public health policy is set by Health and Human Services, by CDC. And we've seen with COVID how they're often more interested in pursuing the policies and programs that they want to pursue, absent facts, absent evidence. And when evidence goes against what they want to do, they tend to interpret the evidence in ways that are just confirm what they wanted to do in the first place. The problem with autism is all the numbers show sharp recent increases in rates, all of which say that there's something going on in the environment of young children that is causing a lifelong disability. But the CDC, and NIH, all they want to do is study genetics, which is an oxymoron. There's no such thing as a genetic epidemic. And so I've been trying to raise the alarm, to point to the right numbers, to point to the evidence, to point to science with a small s. You know, we tend to invoke science a lot these days, but science doesn't speak from one person. Science is a process, it's not a conclusion. And government science is also sort of an oxymoron. Governments, when they get involved in trying to influence the direction of science, often just make it political. And science has become extremely political, and that's something I've worked hard against.
Yeah, and so you've written several books, scientific studies, commentaries, right, on this subject?
I have,
okay.
Yeah. And it's remarkable how something simple as the rising rates of autism has become controversial. It shouldn't be. We should be helping all these families, preventing autism, and getting to the root causes of the epidemic.
Yeah, you've also experienced cancel culture firsthand. Can you tell me what happened?
Well, I think whenever you become a critic of powerful interests in the government, compliant media outlets, and I don't include in that all of you, I think you're terrific, but compliant mainstream media outlets will tend to say that person is crazy. That person should not be listened to. That person is spreading misinformation or disinformation. And what those people most often are just critical. And we've demonized dissent in our modern social media culture. And that's what cancel culture is. We gin up the mobs on Twitter and Facebook. We say mean things about people, and then people's reputations can get destroyed. People can get limited in terms of the discourse they're allowed to participate in, and it's a very toxic trend, one that basically has diminished the rights of free speech, and what we need, and I argue this constantly, we need to restore free, civil is important because we need to remain civil in the public square, free, civil, and open discourse in our public squares. And we are seeing less and less of that. And it's Orwellian in its impact. It's a very dangerous trend. If we demonize and marginalize dissenters or critics of the government, we'll end up with more and more totalitarian rule.
Yeah. So you're a business leader, a warrior dad, an author. What led you to politics and specifically CD3?
Well, I moved to Minnesota a number of years ago. I was in the consulting business for a long time and decided I wanted to travel a little bit less. So I've been working here as the chief financial officer for a number of companies. Um, and and then I was finding myself interested in politics, because I think one of the things I've learned about the scientific journey and the journey I've been on with my daughter is that a lot of these issues aren't a question of science or fact or evidence; they're political. And if I wanted to make an impact and help both the narrow focus that I want to bring to my daughter's issues, but also the broader questions that we face as a society, and the increasing authoritarian nature of the way dissent is treated, I think we needed. I decided I wanted to be more political, and I think in the last couple of years, in terms of the role of government and the left, that's really exploded in the last 5 or 10 years. And I'm just very disturbed as a citizen of the country that we demonize and marginalize dissent. And we have also adopted and disseminated crazy new orthodoxies, defunding the police, critical race theory, the Green New Deal, the denial of basic biology of the male and female genders. And I think that's crazy, and I want to oppose that. And then it just gets wrapped up into the public health questions. We've had 2 years of lockdowns and mandates with COVID, based on no science, based on very little evidence. And now looking backwards, we've seen that most of those policies did very little at best and caused great harm. And so those are the kinds of politics that result when you get an authoritarian leftist regime in place, and with the media getting behind it. I think that's that's what motivated me to get involved in politics. Mm-hmm. And I think Washington is one of the places that people can fight that. We need a better governor. We need a better attorney general. We need a better secretary of state here in Minnesota. And I support all of that, but we also need better representation in Congress.
Yeah, that leads me to my next question. You talk about lockdowns. I've done a few stories talking to business owners who tell me that they don't see any way they'll come back out after the mandated lockdowns. What could you do at a federal level to help your district?
Well, first of all, I think businesses are resilient. If we allow the free market to work, it has a way of recovering. Businesses do best when the government is least involved. The more we try to intervene, the more we subsidize, the more we distort market forces. And we're seeing that today. We're seeing the Green New Deal is a tax on every business, on every consumer that wants to drive to work. We need to free up American energy production. We need alternative sources of energy. We need clean sources of energy, but that doesn't mean that we declare war on fossil fuels. So the government does more damage to business by pretending or trying to do what some people perceive as good than they could ever do by intervening directly. So I think government needs to get out of the way. We need less regulation. We need less restriction on the free market and the good old American spirit of innovation. That's the best way to get American businesses on the path to recovery.
Yeah, you touched a little bit on crime as well. Crime is spilling out into the suburbs. What could you do at a federal level to help crime here locally?
Well, first of all, the 10th Amendment says that policing and law enforcement are local activities by and large. So I think with a better attorney general and better local governance, that's the best path to reducing crime. I do think the federal government can support policies that just promote openness and discussion. I think all of this racial division that we've been seeing has been fomenting discontent. We need to reach out and be one country. We need to stop viewing ourselves as tribes of color. One of the opponent I hope to take on, used to say everyone's invited. I think everyone should be invited to the great American experiment. And Washington is increasingly defining America as a set of tribes that need to go to war with one another. I think we need peace in the great American community, and the last thing we need to do is to foment more division.
Mm-hmm. Last week, you went up against one of your opponents, Tom Weiler, in the GOP debate, and Tom seems to be pretty well rounded when it comes to foreign policy. Do you see yourself undertaking any foreign policy responsibilities in DC?
Well, I have a degree in international affairs. That was my undergraduate degree. I've spent many years in global commerce, so I think the international economy is an area where I bring a fair amount of experience and background. I am an America First advocate. I think American citizens have borne the burden of the defense of the rest of the world. And I think it's time that we share that more, because the rest of the world, Europe and Japan and Korea, many countries are very prosperous now, and they have the ability to contribute to their own defense in ways that they didn't after the First World War. Nuclear deterrence, and Tom was very involved in that, and he served our country well as a submarine commander, and he carried nuclear weapons around in those submarines. And I give him great respect for that service, and that has a role to play. But that's really a worst case scenario if we ever have to, get to the point where nuclear weapons are a serious part of any international conversation. I think by and large the foreign affairs conversations that we should be having are about fair trade, free trade. Sharing the appropriate burdens for defense and governance of international concerns with our allies.
If you get the GOP endorsement coming up pretty soon here, right? How do you plan on beating Dean Phillips in November?
Well, Dean is an interesting guy and a formidable candidate. I think he's absent his political positions, people find him a nice guy, and I think I've never met him. I'd love to meet him, but everything I've seen it suggests that's true. He's been successful in business. He's been involved in a business that's a case study in some of the consulting world that I've seen. The creation of the luxury vodka segment, which is Belvedere vodka. They bought that, built that up, and sold it. So I think Dean's been a successful businessman, and he's also a successful marketer. And I think that's a point that I made in the debate. And I think Dean built a brand that he is not living up to here in CD3. He said he's a moderate, a problem solver, and everyone's invited. Increasingly, he's promoting the politics of racial division. He is voting with Nancy Pelosi 100% of the time, which is what he's done in the last Congress. That's not moderate. He attempts to position himself to solve problems, and I'm sure that he will try, in some ways, but really, he's a part of the problem. And he's actively trying to build his new brand as a Washington insider. And I think that's just more of the same old new woke left. And I think we need to challenge him on Dean, what do you really believe? Are you a moderate? Do you believe in reaching out to your constituents here in CD3? Or do you just want to get along with celebrities and fancy people in Washington soirees? I think that's where he's going. And, I think we need to bring him home and give him a little dose of reality.
And what are you hearing from the people who live in CD3? Are they feeling the same way that Dean Phillips is kind of motivating this division?
I think people are very frustrated with Dean. I think they don't feel like he's speaking for their issues, their needs. And he's obviously part of this disastrous Biden administration or the Democratic lock on Congress and the presidency. It's driving up inflation. Some say it's 8%. I think it's probably more. If you actually get underneath the numbers, it might be double digit. It's clearly the most we've had in decades. We've had weakness abroad. We've had a president who can't string a sentence together. We've had trillion-dollar bills routinely tossed around. We've had woke policies in the military that don't do anything for our military preparedness. It's a crazy and bizarre democratic position. I don't want to say reign because they don't reign. We're a republic, but Dean is a part of that, and people see that. Obviously Republicans are strongly opposed to where he is and view him as kind of having lied to us about what he really was going to do in Washington. And I think independents as well are going to be frustrated. And I hear a lot of people that are frustrated with Dean.
Yeah. Mark, are there any other issues that aren't getting the attention it needs that you can think of?
I've spent a lot of time working on health-related issues, and I have seen the dysfunction of the Washington agencies. I think the National Institutes of Health, Tony Fauci, have been out front for a lot of the past 2 years, and they've failed us. They haven't served the country well. They haven't gotten to the roots of the COVID problem. They have imposed mandates and lockdowns that never worked. It might have made I know there was a lot of fear, but they fomented the fear, and there's evidence that they've funded reckless experiments on bat coronaviruses and given money to Chinese laboratories to do it. I think none of them have been held accountable, and I think we need better oversight in Congress. We need accountability from our big government research sponsors, and that's not getting enough attention.
Yeah. Well, we wish you luck. And if people want to learn more about you, how can they do that?
My website is markblaxillforcongress.com, and I have the priority issues that I've touched on here laid out, and people can go there.
All right. Again, that was Mark Blaxill, business leader, parent advocate, and author. He's running for Minnesota's 3rd Congressional District. Listeners, stay up to date on alphanews.org and sign up for our free daily newsletter on our website. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you next time.